Good evening, everybody. This is the last edition of the Project Inspire Inspiration Series before Passover. And I'd like to continue. This is my third part in a series on the Haggadah. And tonight, we're going to try to talk about making a Seder, creating a Seder, which appeals to everyone. And that is a very tall order. We're chewing off, a very big piece of meat here. So I'll try to make it applicable to as many types of people that I can. This is mostly for people who are having Seders with secular, less affiliated people, with families which have various levels of knowledge, of interest. And now a lot of us are confined without even choices. And that's a good thing, actually, to be able to, be with those closest to you and to really try to make something special happen over here. So it's best if you have a Haggadah to follow this tonight. Be the best. And I also just want to say I have prepared a Seder companion, which I'm going to draw on a lot of the material from that companion throughout this presentation. And I want you to download the companion. If you obviously buy a computer, if you can download this companion, actually there are two documents there, one cartoon and one companion. And the website is projectinspire.com/Passover. projectinspire.com/Passover. So you don't have to pay attention to every little nuance and take notes, because I'm going to give you a pretty comprehensive guide, which has most of the ideas and the novel points that I'm going to bring up tonight. So we first have to have introduction. The goal of the Seder is to give everybody there a positive experience, and first and foremost, to really try to transmit the tradition to your children. This is probably the most important night of the Jewish year for transmitting our tradition to our family. So really, there's typically more enthusiastic people and less enthusiastic people. Now, because you're on this call, you're going to be called the enthusiastic people. That's pretty obvious. You're here tonight, you want to make this something special. And I guess I would say the most important thing is to not overshoot where your crowd is holding. I would almost say, the popular show Curb Your Enthusiasm. I would almost say this Seder should be the Curb Your Enthusiasm Seder. And I mean that not in a way to dumb it down, but I mean, look, the whole point is to stimulate interest. And you'll see going through the Seder, it's all about question and answers. So you have to really plant or inspire people to ask questions for the answers to make a difference. We don't lecture tonight. We really try to encourage and invite. So that's going to be the spirit of the evening. Now, there are a few things which I think you can do to make it a little easier on people. Number one, most people who are less affiliated, they are not used to starting late, so late as a traditional Seder starts. Candlelighting this week in New York is 7-11. Most authorities say you really can't start the Seder before 8 p.m. So it's kind of a little on the late side, 8 p.m. But that's when Passover comes in this year. The clock's changed 8 p.m. And that's when you make Kaddish. That's the first part of the Seder, Kaddish. Now, it's late, and even if someone makes a short Seder, you're really not going to get to your meal for at least an hour. Now, a typical Seder where you're really going through everything, even if it's on the quick side, is an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. A Seder which is taking its time and kind of exploring the passages, my Seder is probably closer to 3 hours. In other words, I don't really get till the matzah till around 11 o'clock. If I start at 8, I'm probably not getting there till around 11 o'clock. Now, if someone's not used to that, they're gonna not eat all day, and they're gonna be starving. I remember the first Passover I ever did as a traditional Jew in Israel. I didn't eat the whole day because I always understood Passover was all about eating. So we didn't eat the dinner till about 12 o'clock at night. And I kind of asked for seconds of the matzah. I was so starving. So the custom I have in my house, which I think works very well, is to serve food in the 5 to 6 o'clock range. Some kind of meat, some type of, just so people aren't hungry, because that's going to set your Seder up for technical failure if people are starving. The other thing is that you need to give the people in your household expectations about how this evening is going to go. And you might even want to discuss with them what you're intending to do and kind of take their temperature a little bit, because that's going to help you decide what kind of Seder you want to put together. So the other thing is, it doesn't always work. We try to encourage the kids and the adults to take a nap on Erev Pesach because it is a late night. Typically tonight, you're really supposed to finish your Seder by about 12:30 a.m. So for little kids, it's a little bit on the late side. So it's a great idea to help them, to try to get them to go and take a bit of a nap. Now, another good idea to get people into it this year. People are home next couple of days; they're not going anywhere. So to give your young adults, your teenagers, even your children, videos to watch next 2 days. There's a new video on Torah Live, a half-hour video, very, very well done, about a 13-year-old who's encountering Passover. It's like a movie. It's 26 minutes, excellent. There's excellent little short videos on h.com. Look on Chabad. It's a good time to encourage people to get more aware. You might even do a Passover trivia game next couple of days to feed them answers to questions that you might come up on the Seder, because everyone likes to have the right answer, and it kind of buys them into it. So that's one thing I think I would definitely do. There's also a Torah workbook on the Torah Live site as well. So that would be something you can give people to pique their interest now the next couple of days. The other thing is, you might, after we get it done tonight, you're going to pick out the sections you want to focus on. It could be that you could assign, say you have young adults, college kids, or even older kids, or they're into it somewhat. Why don't you assign them a section? Assign them the 4 sons, assign them the Maude, assign them the plagues. If they get into it, that'll be the best way to really get them pumped up for the Seder, is to get them, giving them some responsibility for it. Now, you really can't rely on trying to figure it out when you sit down for the Seder. The person who's trying to run it, the person who is, taking responsibility for it, you really have to look it over beforehand and know what you want to do, what you don't want to do, and really how much time you have and how much time you want to spend. Now, I'm going to go through, start going through the Haggadah in a moment. And there's kind of 3 levels I think you can go here. You can have people, sometimes people like to read along. That also gets people's attention and gets them involved in the Seder, to have them read along with everybody. So if that works for you, by all means, have them read along. Now, Reb Shmuel Kamenetsky, big rabbi in America, mentioned to me once, I asked him to try to speed things along a little bit. He says, you don't have to read every paragraph. You can summarize a paragraph and really summarize it very, very quickly. Like Yachal Me Rosh Chodesh example is a paragraph. It's about when we start. You could say, this is about when we start, the night of the 15th. If you just look at a few of the paragraphs that you want to go through quickly, like the wise men in Bnei Brak, or whatever paragraph you don't think is going to resonate, because it is a bit of a code, all the different paragraphs. And for someone not initiated, some of them don't have that much applicability at the get-go. Some of them have much more, they resonate much more with people, some a little bit less. So you could choose to whip through some of those and not read them, just kind of say, this is doing this, this is doing this, this is doing this. And the ones that you want to focus on, you could stop a little bit. That could be a very good way to move it along, to keep people interested. And also they're gonna realize you're not trying to kill them. You're gonna skip over the things that you feel aren't so applicable to them, they're not going to be that interested in. That is also an approach. I'm going to give you in the Seder Companion some stories, even a cartoon, different things which are examples that can be brought out of the text, but it's not the text itself. It's not a Devar Torah on a text. It's going to be a story that highlights something important. I found that it is more relatable to people, and that's kind of my approach. Now, when you download it, you'll be able to pick the ones you like the best, the ones that resonate with you the best, and those are the ones you can focus on in your Seder. 3 of them, 4 of them, 5 of them, whatever you feel the capacity is of your of the people at your table. Now, the other thing is, after the old favorites, the Maude, the 4 sons, as an example, you want to make sure that they get to the section right after the 4 plagues called Pesach, Matzah and Hummus. It's Rabbi Gamliel's rule. We're going to go through it because everyone holds all of the halachic literature rules. That is the minimum that you need to do to tell the story. So it could be for the quickest Seder possible. For those who really aren't with you too much, you do the Maude, you do the 4 sons, anything that's familiar to people, they really, really enjoy. Then you sing Dayenu, because Dayenu is something, you mention the 10 plagues, and you sing Dayenu. And then you do the Pesach, Matzah, and Hummus. And you explain that. And I'll give you ideas to get the major themes of the holiday out of those 3 mitzvot. Those are the 3 mitzvot of the day. Then you can do the mitzvot. You're at the matzah, you're at the bitter herbs, and you have you had 2 cups of wine at this point, and then you have your meal. Now, that will be probably perfect and great for a lot of folks. At that point, they'll probably recede, they'll, get lost at that point. They won't continue to the bitter end. But you could go back and fill in the gaps in the Magid, the first portion, because you want to read the whole thing. You want to actually, do a little bit more. That's fine. So you can kind of like jump through and then circle back a little bit later on. Okay, so let us begin. 15 steps to freedom, 15 parts of the Seder. And the first part is Kaddish, and that's when you make the Kaddish. Sanctifying over a cup of wine. You pour the wine. The custom is not to pour your own glass. We want to accentuate freedom, and a free person like a king didn't pour his own wine glass. So it's a very beautiful custom to pour your neighbor's wine for them. So that's Kaddish. Orchatz, we try to change things up to get the kids asking questions. The first part of the Seder really does a lot of things, taking the Seder plate on, taking it off, doing the Maude, the Karpas. All these things are deviations from the normal way we do things. We usually don't wash before eating a vegetable. Typically, in observant Judaism, traditional Judaism, you wash before bread, you do the hamotzi, and you wash before bread. Here we don't do it because we want to get the kids to ask questions. So many of these things are for kids asking questions. One nice thing is that whoever gets a question, you actually bring to the table nuts, sweets, something the kids like. And every question that they have, and remember I mentioned before, you can even give them trivia the next day or two to plant them with some answers. And as you go through, you can ask questions and give them rewards, and that also has the ability to keep them in the game. So the next thing we do is Karpas. And Karpas is dipping a green vegetable. Now, the interesting thing about Karpas, again, this is on your handout. If you downloaded it, you can follow along with me. This is the longer handout, the Seder Freedom Companion. The word Karpas is 4 letters, a chaf, a resh, a pei, and a samech. A kaf, every letter in the Hebrew language, if you say it out, in this particular instance, it means something. Kaf is a palm. The next letter, resh, is one who's poor. It actually literally means one who's poor. The third letter is a pei. A pei is peh, the mouth. And the fourth letter is a samech. Samech also means, if you spell the letters out, support. So the idea you want to get across to your family at your table is that the Jewish people are all one. we can support our fellow brethren two ways. If we're rich, we can open our hand, we can open our palm and actually give them money or give them food. And if we're not poor, we can always give by supporting them with our words, with our encouragement. That is a beautiful idea of Karpas. Imagine relatives from Russia that you've never met. They are arriving suddenly with their 3 children in America. They have no means of support. Federation wasn't able to give them the apartment that they had promised. And they don't speak the language, and they're counting on you to house them for a month. So what do? Well, they're family, you get over it and you do it. Recently, I had a situation which shed a little bit of light on this. The car broke. It wasn't going to be ready for a month. The part they were ordering just didn't come in. It was gone and on and on. And you know what? We made do. Never thought we'd be able to. Got used to having 2 cars. We switched schedules around. We had a little bit of patience. And lo and behold, something we thought we could never do without, we were able to do without. I think this resonates a little bit with us now in our quarantine situation as well. There are a lot of things we've learned to do without now. And there are a lot of things which seem that their value isn't as great as we placed on them before. I think health, I think happiness, I think family are all ideas that have come to the fore. So the point about the Karpas and the next thing we're going to talk about is the idea that we're one family. Now what you do after the Karpas is you break the middle matzah into 2. It's symbolic of the lechem oni, the poor man's bread. A poor man never eats a whole loaf. He breaks it because he wants to hide the other one for later when he's going to be hungry. And the larger half, we break it in half, but you never get it quite even. The larger one is going to be the afikomen. And the afikomen, we put it away in the bag for later. Now, why the afikomen is symbolic? It's a stand-in for the Paschal lamb. We don't eat the Paschal lamb anymore. We don't have a temple. So we have the afikomen as a stand-in, but it represents redemption. It represents the ultimate redemption. And the reason why we have the bigger piece of matzah is it's almost as if to say, you ain't seen nothing yet. This Passover redemption, as wonderful as it was, wait till you see that final redemption. Wait till we live through that Messianic age. So we put the larger section of matzah away for later. So now there's a couple more sections that we're going to go over now. We're not going to do that. And we open up the story of Maude. It says, Halach ma'anya, anyone who's hungry, come and eat. Anyone who needs a Seder, come. The idea is, again, we're one people. One of the points of the Seder is to try to get everyone feeling part of Am Yisrael, part of the Jewish people. The holiday of Passover, as well as freeing us, as well as giving us a connection to God through the mitzvahs that we got at Mount Sinai. But it made us a people. It made us a people that were connected together, that went through, like everybody knows, when you go through with your army buddies, go through a war, you never get with any closer to any people on this earth because you're one. You bonded together in the crucible, in the furnace, and you're one. Story about a young man who was in college named Sam, and he had a part-time job, and his part-time job was as a census taker on the Ohio-Kentucky border. He was trying to earn some money to go on spring break to Florida, and every twice a week for about a month and a half, 2 months, they would go with the Ohio state worker, and he would organize the students, and they would go from door to door, and they'd count heads. So right before he was ready to go to spring break, he went to the state worker for his check, and he said, "I'm sorry, but the state had some problems, issuing the checks, and it's going to be about a month delayed." So needless to say, he was very upset, and he spoke to him, and he expressed his dissatisfaction with that. And he says, "You know what I'm going to do? You meet me tomorrow at 12 o'clock at TD Bank." He said, "Okay." So he meets him at TD Bank. The worker takes out the $1,000 that he owed him. He gives it to him, and he said, it's a personal loan. I trust you. And when you come back and you get the money from the state, just pay me back. So he said to him, "Why are you doing this?" He answered, "You're Jewish, aren't you?" He said, "I am too, and that makes us brothers." He said, "Don't tell anybody about this. Just send me the money when you get it." Sam said, thanks. That was the last time he ever saw this man. We are one. We are one people, and we have one people with a common past and hopefully an incredibly common destiny together with one another. The next part of the Seder that we want to take a look at is right after Halach Ma'anya is the Manish Tanah. Now the Manish Tanah is famous. Everybody likes the Manish Tanah. The youngest get up and they do it. And the point about the Manish Tanah is that there are two expressions of slavery, and there are two expressions of freedom. Freedom is, why do you dip? Why do you recline? And the slavery is, why do we eat matzah? And why do we eat bitter herbs? So the question is, what are we celebrating? Are we celebrating slavery, or are we celebrating freedom? And the answer is that it's all one. It's one story where the delivery came about because of the affliction. One led inextricably to the other, and when the story was done in the rearview mirror, we could see how everything was a unified story, where our challenge of going down to Egypt made us the people we were. And without that adversity in so many different ways and in such a harsh manner, we never would have had the right stuff to make it through. It's almost like a boxer who goes through, a torturous training regimen. And it's because of that training regimen that he's able to then win the championship. That was the idea of the Jewish people. If we didn't go through that crucible, that furnace of Mitzrayim, as they call it, we never would have had the ability and the faith and the foundation of relationship to God and to each other to last these last 3,000 years. It would have been absolutely impossible. And I think as we've seen the Jewish people bounce around from nation to nation without our own land, persecuted and plagues, all these different things for thousands of years, it really, as the years roll by, it's more and more understandable that we needed to get the right stuff to become the Jews that we are today. Now, the next paragraph is of Vadam Hayinu. It's the answer to, is it about slavery and it's freedom, about freedom? And it basically answers, yeah, it's about both. You were slaves to Pharaoh, and then God took us out with a mighty hand and a mighty arm. And if God didn't do that, we would still be enslaved in Egypt today. And obviously, it doesn't mean we'd be enslaved in a physical sense, but we would not have the internal ability to transcend our limitations. In other words, we wouldn't have the capacity to free ourselves wherever we find ourselves in the world. We'd be totally at the mercy of, quote unquote, our jailer from the external prison they put us in. We now, after Passover, we could be in a quarantine. We could be in a jail cell, and we could be free people, totally spiritually, totally psychologically free. We gain that capacity from God's bringing us out of Egypt, and it makes us who we are. It's our most valuable asset. So we thank God for that. So what I want to mention now is this idea of gratitude. Now, gratitude is something you can talk about at this point. You can also talk about this in the middle of the story near the 10 plagues, because really one very formative idea that you want to get across to everybody is that God made himself our personal God throughout this Egyptian experience. The plagues were fine-tuned to afflict who God wanted to afflict, to save who he wanted to save. The splitting of the Red Sea, there's an argument brought at the end of it where one rabbi says it was 50 plagues, 10 that had 5 plagues apiece. One said 200, one said 250. Why? What do we care? 200, 100, 500, 10,000. What does it matter? We know it was the splitting of the Red Sea, but what does it matter how many little mini plagues that it translates into? And the idea is that we learn to be experts at appreciating just what God did for us, not just at this moment, but all the way back from the beginning of Jewish history. And when we develop glasses to see the good that was done for us. And since God is the ultimate doer of good, he's the source that stands behind all the messengers. Your mother, they say, when he feeds a baby, is the long arm of God. So one of the main parts of the whole entire Seder is to get us to be grateful for all God does for us. And through that gratitude, now we want to give back. And that was really the basis for our covenant and the basis for our connection to Hashem, to God. And that is really why we want to do the mitzvahs. It's because we see the good God's given us, and when someone gives good, you want to return that favor in kind. So would it really be such a big deal if parents didn't teach their kids to say thank you and kids didn't say thank you? It would be. And what's the reason? Because there's nothing worse than an ingrate. Just like no one wants to be called an ingrate, no one wants to be married by one, be friends with one, or to raise one. Thus the magic words, thank you. Listen to this. All ingrates end up in prison. Maybe not the kind with bars, but impenetrable walls erected by ego, which locks the world out and shuts the ingrate in a world of bitterness and illusion. That's fascinating, because what ingratitude does is it forces you into illusion. God, our God, we introduced to the world, is all about truth, is all about reality. So gratitude, which is in Hebrew, hakaras hatov, the recognition of good, fine-tunes our ability to see reality, to see truth. The more we're grateful, the more we see. It's almost like the prescription on our glasses get more and more fine-tuned. The Hebrew word for thank you is todah. The word Yehudah, the Jew, the Yehudim, come from the word todah. But the word todah, to thank, at its root, means to admit. Because whenever you thank someone, you're admitting they did something to you. And when you admit that, even though we don't want to admit it, why don't we want to admit it sometimes? Because we don't want to pay, we have this inborn feeling not to admit someone did something for me because I'm automatically obligated to give back in kind. And if we don't appreciate all those messengers that God sends, we can never, ever have a relationship with God. All spirituality depends on this trait of hakaras hatov. So now we're going to go on to the four sons. The four sons, we're going to skip Rabbi Eliezer and Bnei Brak, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah. And now we say Baruch Hamakom Baruch Hu. Some have a custom to sing the song. It's a nice song. You can look it up on the internet. There are four sons. We're very familiar with this. There's the Chacham, there's the wise son, the Rasha, the rebellious son, the simple son, and the son who doesn't know how to ask. Now it's interesting the order that it's written in. It's written from the wise to the rebellious to the simple, and then to the doesn't know how to ask. Now, if they're written in the order of, who's good, who is the good child to the quote unquote bad child, the rebellious child should be all the way in the bottom, not in the second. So what the order is reflective of an intellectual curiosity exhibited by the questioner and questions and detailed questions. So the Chacham, the wise son, is first, has the best question, the most nuanced question. Then comes the rebellious son. The simple son has a very simple question, and then the last son has no question at all. So the tremendous lesson that one of the lessons you get out of this is that the entry point into being having the ability to become the great person, the good person, the awesome person, is question and answer, is just trying to dig into the reality of life through questions. There's nothing worse, we say, than apathy, which is exhibited by, unfortunately, this fourth son. And we even say, even though the second son, the rebellious one, is asking questions, and they're challenging questions, and they're tough questions, and they're questions that parents and rabbis don't like to hear, asking questions, even tough ones, means you're engaged. You're in the fight, and you can be flipped around. You can be made and shown to understand the era of how you're thinking. So that's why it goes in that direction. Now, the essence of the evil son's question, or the rebellious son's question, is he says, what's the purpose of this work to you? And the rabbis mention that he's relating to Judaism as a burden. Now, this is something I think that many of your parents and grandparents can probably relate to, and maybe even related that to you throughout your life. That when Jews got to America, it was hard to be a Jew. They walked around like it was a sack of rocks on their backs. Now, if you get into Judaism, as I did later in my life, there's a freshness, there's a vitality when you really understand, you go below the rituals, when you get down to what's really going on, there's an excitement and a depth and an intellectual fiber that challenges anything that I ever encountered in university or in my readings. I went to an Ivy League college. I was an investment banker. I was blown away by the depth, the incredible depth of the wisdom. And I'm telling you, it's inexhaustible. It's like an onion. You go one layer and another layer and another layer. It just keeps going all the way down. So we want to ask questions. We want to encourage our children and realize also that every one of us has one of these children in us. Sometimes we're the Chacham, the wise son, and we ask good questions and we want to grow. Other times we're lazy and we just want to say, leave me alone, and we mock. And we're probably the rebellious son. Other times we just, put it on autopilot with the simple son. But the answers that we give to the rebellious son, to the wise son, to the simple son, what we're really trying to get across is we're really trying to reach the one that has no question. The Baal HaGada, the author of the Gada, says you got to pique his interest. You got to open the discussion up for him, and that's what we're trying to. To get across, so that fourth son doesn't become the son that doesn't come to the Seder the next year. The simple son, just an idea about the simple son, and this is something that also I think can impact the one with no question. When your child asks you a simple question like, why does a magnet stick to metal? What are you going to say, right? Or how about this one? Why doesn't it ever snow in the summer? Most of us are like Anisha in the eyes of our children, and we find ourselves running for cover when they ask these quote-unquote cute questions. I'll be right back, we sheepishly assure them, and we're suddenly reminded of some urgent call that has to be made. Why don't you turn on the Discovery Channel? You know why we don't have the answers for our kids? Because we did what we secretly hope they will soon learn to do. We stopped asking questions. What a tragedy. We've sacrificed youthful curiosity, simplicity on the altar of intellectual sophistication. That's one of the things we can get, we can re-spark at the Seder, is our beautiful question of why. Why is a beautiful question? And why helps us dig down. Albert Einstein said, the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. He to whom this emotion is stranger, who can no longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead. His eyes are closed. Could it be that, quote, what is this? Is not such a simple question at all. So now we're going to move on after the She'eno de la Shol. We're going to go to the formal beginning of the story. And it's interesting, it goes back, it says, Mitchilasa of the Avodah Zarah. Originally, our ancestors were idol worshippers, idol worshippers. But now, the omnipresent has brought us near to his service. And it goes back to the story of Abraham. Now, we're reminded at this point what we know, and that is, we mentioned before, that we're responsible for one another, and we have to teach one another. Abraham was an amazing person. One of the things that Abraham did was he brought monotheism to the world. He actually, quote unquote, discovered God. He was a philosopher, a world-class philosopher, and it didn't matter that the whole entire world were steeped in idol worship. He wasn't going to bow down to them and wasn't going to kowtow. Not Abraham. Abraham ruthlessly fought for God. It's a story is told that the great philosopher Pascal, he was a religious philosopher. He used to argue and debate with the king Louis XIV. Louis XIV was agnostics. They were debating whether there was God, whether God really existed. And Louis XIV got fed up once with Pascal, and he said, "Stop with your philosophical proofs. Give me one good reason, practical, to believe in God." He thought for a second. He says, "The Jews, Your Majesty, the Jews." The Jews' fight in this world was beyond all odds. It was like a cat with 99 lives. Abraham understood that our story was going to be a witness to the entire world of the truth of our Jewish religion and our tradition. And he bequeathed that to us to stand and fight for it, not on the basis of blind faith, but on the basis of knowledge based, on the greatest thing we can all share is our history, our common history. Many non-Jews, Mark Twain amongst them, John Adams, have looked at the Jewish people's history and said, of course, there must be a God in the world. I remember Anatoly Sharansky. I heard him give a speech 25 years ago, and the students asked him when he started believing in God. He said once he started reading Jewish history. That's what Abraham did. He started the family business. The family business was introducing the world to God. So it's a famous story about Abraham. One day, Terah, Abraham's father, asked his son to mind the family business. He happened to have an idol store. So Abraham didn't want to be bothered with these idols, but he says, you know what? I'm going to teach my father, quote unquote, a real lesson over here. He took a hammer that he found lying around, smashed all the idols with the hammer, and he left the biggest idol standing, unsmashed. He took the hammer, put it in the idol's hand. When the father comes back, he has a conniption. He says, Abraham, what happened? He says, well, I left, for 10 minutes to do an errand, locked the door. The biggest idol took a hammer, smashed all the idols up, and you see it's still in his hand. He says, that's ridiculous. He can't pick up a hammer, let alone smash all the idols. So he said, if that's the case, why do you worship these idols? One represents the wind, one represents the sun, one represents the surf, one represents light, powers, different powers. He says, why don't you worship the one power, God, which is behind all of these sub-powers? And in that, he became the originator of monotheism. He says those are all just subsets of one power which stands behind the many. So that's what Abraham was a person that found God, that preached and shared what he knew with other Jews, like the Soviets did. They learned from Abraham. If they knew an aleph in the Soviet Union, the refuseniks in the 80s, the 70s and 80s, they taught an aleph. If they knew a base, they taught a base. That is Abraham, our original ancestor. As I said before, Abraham found himself on the other side of the river. Now, he was called the Ivri, the Hebrew. And what did the Hebrew really mean? It meant that he was on the other side. He came from the other side of the Mesopotamian river, right? That's what it meant literally, but it meant figuratively is that he stood against the entire world. They believed in idols. He believed in God. He was the originator, I like to joke, like to say, who said, just say no. If you know truth, it doesn't matter. Truth isn't arrived at by majority opinion. He knew the truth, one man against millions. He wasn't going to back down. There's a story. Rachel had a couple of very cool friends who had cool parents. One of his parents, Chris's father, used to get them tickets to concerts, the greatest shows all the time. She had another friend, Shelly. Shelly's mom was a cool mom as well, and she managed a Mexican restaurant. The Mexican restaurant, they go there Saturday night. She'd give them free food, and I always tell the waiters to give them a couple of beers, even though they're about 15, 16 years old. And she loved the weekends with her friends. She loved them. But she also felt a little pressure to do certain things she really didn't want to do. And it was difficult. She didn't want to give them up. On the other hand, she was getting to territory she didn't want to get into. One night, Rachel's very uncool father said, can I share something with you? She said, sure, Dad. She says, when I was 17 years old, a couple of friends and I decided we were going to break into the school We were going to steal a bunch of tests, and we were going to get all the answers to these tests, and we were going to ace all these final exams in I guess it was our junior year. And he said, I don't know what happened, but right before we were about to do it, I decided it wasn't for me. My friends told me, you're chicken, you're scared. He says, no, I'm braver than all of you. He said, they got the test. They all did a lot better than he did on his test, but he never regretted it for 1 second. He says, Rachel, I trust you. I really, really trust you. Jews have always felt different. The question is, what do you do when you feel different? Do you cave in, or do you stand for what you believe in? That's the kind of the fortitude that the Jewish people have always had. So now, as we go down, we were idol worshippers all the way over, and Abraham really was very in doubt over whether his children had the strength to make it through history. He felt, as I alluded to really before, that we weren't going to survive. He might have been strong enough, but he just had this inkling that he wasn't going to, they weren't going to last. And God promises Abraham, your children are going to be the chosen people. It's just, how do I know? And the next thing we know we were brought down to Egypt. And God was saying, I'm promising you they're going to make it. And you know how they're going to make it? I'm going to have to bring them down to Egypt. I'm going to have to train them. I'm going to have to put some heat on them. I'm going to have to get them to come together, congeal, and get powerful for them to make it. But you can believe me, they're going to make it. So if you go down to the next song we usually sing, it's a very famous paragraph. V'hisha amda la v'seinu v'lanu. It is this that stood by our fathers and us. For not only has one risen against us to annihilate us, but at every generation they rise up to annihilate us. But the Holy One, blessed be He, rescues us from their hand. Now it couldn't be anything more true than this. This was written thousands of years ago, but it just seems like in every generation, someone's trying to destroy the Jewish people. Pogroms, Hitler, Chmelnytsky massacre, the Cossacks, anti-Semitism, skinheads, in one form, the Muslim world, in one form or another, this seems to have legs, this promise. Now, the simple explanation is this promise, which is in the paragraph before, the promise that's made for God, that's what stood behind us and our forefathers, meaning God's not going to let them have their way with us. They might rise for a time, they might inflict damage, but they're not going to decimate the Jewish people. And the Jewish people's ability to survive through persecution spread out around the entire world is something inexplicable in natural human terms. No one's been able to understand how they've been able to survive. So consider the following story from World War II. A true story. It was a sergeant, he wasn't Jewish. In the aftermath of the war, they set up some military governments in the different German cities to get them back on their feet. And this sergeant saw these two girls by the river, and he said, where do you guys live? Where do you girls live? And they said, well, we used to live in Berlin, but Hitler gave my father a shoe factory here in this town. Leipzig, I think it was, or Pilsen. So he said, where did he get the factory from? He said, well, it belonged to the Jews. Where's your house? Do you live near here? He says, yeah, that's our house. So Sergeant Bill sees this gorgeous, gracious, beautiful home, and he says, whose home is that? He says, that was also the home of the Jews that our father, got their home in their factory. So he said to himself, did it ever bother you that other people's homes and businesses were taken away from them and given to you? So the two kids looked innocently at him and said, but they were just Jews. So he said, like, well, how would you feel if someone took your house and your father's business and gave it away? And they said, but they were just Jews. This is the attitude that we've come to accept And it hasn't, unfortunately, I'd like to say it's an aberration. I'd like to say it's something that just happened in a little pocket in time. But we've seen this again and again and again. Even this coronavirus, how many are blaming it on the Jewish people? How many? We've always been the universal donor for this hatred. So I want to just ask a question. And the question is there a silver lining in this anti-Semitism? Because one way to read this paragraph, Hisha Amdam, is that the anti-Semitism has stood by us so they wouldn't annihilate us. So my question to you, how could the anti-Semitism actually provide a silver lining to protect us all these thousands of years? Now, if you were here, I'd be able to ask you, be able to have an interaction, but unfortunately you're not. But the answer is that anti-Semitism has probably kept the Jewish more than the love of the non-Jews. And unfortunately, you see it in our times. Any society where we've been accepted, we've been with open arms, whether it was in Germany during the Enlightenment or France or even in America now, we have put an end to our own Judaism, so to speak. We've done a better job at putting an end to our own Jewish identity, Judaism, and so forth with assimilation than any anti-Semite ever was able to do. For some reason, when they come at us as Jews, because we're Jews, we rally together. We realize intuitively there must be something about us which makes us special. I don't know why. I'm just like them, in Germany. Imagine the 50-year-old who was decorated in World War I, who fought for the Germans. His motherland and fatherland was Berlin, not Jerusalem, and he was sent to the gas chambers. Perplexing. They weren't able to even put that into any type of perspective. That's because there's this anti-Semitism that's always going to be there to make sure that we're going to do our job, to make sure we are the Jewish people, and we're going to continue to be the Jewish people. So now if you go on from here, the guts of the story is from Say Velomade, which means go and learn what Lavan, the Aramean, tried to do to our forefather Jacob. And this is very interesting because this section is really based on 4 verses. These 4 verses are found in the 5th book of the Torah, Devarim, chapter 26, verses 5 to 8. 4 verses, and they basically go through the sweep of Jewish history all the way back from Jacob to the splitting of the Red Sea and the Jews being saved and going through. Now, the Baal Haggadah, the word for the Haggadah, he amplifies each verse. But I really invite you, if you have the packet, take a look. If you don't have the packet, look into your either Haggadah or your Chumash. But the first verse is, an Aramean tried to destroy my father. He descended to Egypt, sojourned there with few people, and there he became a nation, great, mighty, and numerous. The story starts with Jacob. In Egypt, we were forged as a nation. My bold comments, those are ideas I want you to remember. And he taught his children. Abraham taught his children about God, just like we're teaching about our children tonight. And he was independent. He independently stood as an Ivri on the other side of the river. The Egyptians did evil to us, afflicted, is the second verse, and imposed hard labor upon us. Not long after Joseph saves them from starvation and makes them the greatest, richest empire in the world. And by the way, Egypt, the land of Egypt, means restricted. Comes from the word restriction. Pharaoh makes himself forget all the good done by the Jews. He says, I don't know this Joseph. And he starts oppressing them and starts putting all these terrible decrees on them. Imagine, he saved your country, and this is how you pay him back. But yet, he doesn't expel the Jews. He needs the Jews. The non-Jew always has this love-hate relationship with the Jewish people. I want them in my country because they're going to build my country and make my country great. Line 3, we cried out to Hashem, the God of our fathers, and Hashem heard our cry, saw our affliction, our burden, and our oppression. We remembered what our forefathers taught us about God. We, the Jewish people, we woke up, we remembered. And we cried out to our Father in heaven. We cried out to our Father in heaven incredibly sincerely. And he listened. And I just want to show you a cartoon that I have, and hopefully you took this as well. This is the idea of anti-Semitism. I don't know if you can see this well. You can read this, but it says, Orthodox conservative reform, I for one prefer not to dwell on differences. The anti-Semitism is the universal donor to the Jewish people. But God's with us. In the last line, Hashem brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm, with great awe, with signs, and with wonders. Now, at this point, remember I said at the beginning, that piece about gratitude, you could also say this over here at the 10 plagues when God saved us. But few things we learned from the whole Egyptian experience of the 10 plagues. We learned that God created the world. The 10 plagues, mystically, they say that each 10 plagues undid one of the 10 statements of creation. God created the world in 10 steps, and this was like as if he had 10 pieces of clothing. Each cloak was taken off when we realized God was in control of another piece of the world. From the physical, from the land to the skies and all the other powers, we saw that there was nothing that God was not in control of, even life itself. And it wasn't just life he was in control of. It was the firstborn's life, because that's parallel to the creation of the world, the first cause. Man's first creation is their first child. God's first creation is the world. So in that plague of the firstborn, the Egyptians realized God was also the creator in heavens and the earth. He didn't just go away. He's actively involved. He's lovingly going to pay back, well, on the one hand, pay back the good for the good that they do, but also he's gonna settle the scorecard with the enemies of the Jewish people and people that are immoral in the world. And the Jewish people saw at the splitting of the sea in great detail how every single Egyptian was taken care of and punished to the finest degree possible. And we walked away from the plagues and the splitting of the Red Sea with such a state of awe and love for God, because we saw in a flash how all the negative turned into incredible positive, and our nation was born in this surge of gratitude and love for our Creator. And that's what propelled us into a covenant with God. We made a covenant with God because it was personal. We stood at Mount Sinai a few months later after this experience, and we committed out of love, not out of fear. Yes, we assumed another master, but this master was someone you want to follow, someone you want to give everything you have to. And that is really our relationship to God. So then what we do at this point in the Seder, and I'm sure you want to say Dayenu, this is again the same extension of this idea of gratitude and miracles. And I want to say just a quick word about miracles. There was once a young man who went to a rabbi and said, "Rabbi, if you can show me a miracle, I will become religious." So Rabbi had these great powers. He was able to summon Elijah the prophet. They went back and got first row seats to Moses splitting the sea. After the sea was split, he said, "Wow, that's amazing. I'm going to go out and buy tefillin." A couple of weeks later, he comes back to the rabbi and says, "You know, I'm just not feeling it. I'm not feeling it anymore. Can you do another miracle?" Sure enough, back to the Red Sea. Moses does the trick again. That's amazing. I'm going to go to yeshiva now. I'm going to be spiritual and connected to God forever. A few weeks later, he comes back and says, "I'm going to hack it. Can you show me another miracle?" So he brings him back to the Red Sea. Moses puts up his staff, sea parts, and he says, "Wait a minute. Every time Moses does that, the sea parts. That's not a miracle. That's us. We've gotten so used to the miraculous that we don't even realize all the miracles in our lives. And the greatest miracle of all is us. The fact that we're here. As I said before, this cat with 99 lives is the biggest incredible miracle of all. The only thing that's between nature and miracle is the frequency of when it happens. Dayenu teaches us the littlest miracle that God does for us. We would see it as a miracle. The giving us of life would be enough for us to have gratitude to the end of this world, and would prompt me to want to give my life to serve our Creator. Even with one, that's Dayenu. But Dayenu goes through a list of those things to just impress upon us in detail. As I said before, every time we appreciate and we see, then we have more of an ability to appreciate further and further as we go. Okay. 3 very, very quick. We're going to do this very quickly. Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. And please, I suggest you look this up so you can get this, because this is very important. The 3 mitzvos. Rabbi Gamliel, this is the close, the 3 mitzvos. So the Paschal Lamb is about shechting, getting rid of our illusions. The Paschal Lamb was the God of the Egyptians. So when we sacrificed that God, we said, we are all in for the real God. You have no power. And sometimes that takes sacrifice. That's why it's called the sacrifice. And we are getting rid of our illusions. And that power is something that we get to this very day by doing that mitzvah. We don't do it today, the Paschal Lamb, because we have no temple, but we eat the afikomen instead. But that's what it symbolizes, getting rid of the illusion in life. The biggest motif of Passover is getting rid of chametz and eating matzah. Chametz represents what I call the bakery window. The bakery window of life is a window that beckons us. Everything's great. It tastes good. It's beautiful. I desire it. And we bring it home and we eat it, and it doesn't give us the bang for the buck. Matzah, on the other hand, is all bread, real bread, just flour and water. None of the rise, none of the sugar, none of the flavor, none of the fake out. Passover is about freeing ourselves from the illusions and the desires that we have in the physical world. And we detox from this world of chametz for a world of matzah. It also symbolizes humility. It's poor man's bread, whereas the chametz is arrogant. It's puffed up. Those are the 2 things that enslave us, desire and ego. And those are the things we clamp down upon. And maror, the last thing I want to mention is that the maror, we have to sometimes look at it in hindsight. It says Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. The Passover offering, Matzah, and Maror. Really, it should be the reverse. Maror came first. The bitterness came before the Matzah and the Paschal Lamb. Yet it's the Maror is last. Why? Because we can only understand the bitterness of the Maror in context of the salvation. And they used to eat this at the temple. It was like a shawarma. It was a soft matzah, lamb, and spicy relish. Spicy relish was the maror. The maror is what gave it its flavor. The maror which gave it its spice. The maror is what gave it its sweetness. And the last bit of the Seder here, the final piece, is Hallel. And Hallel is thanking God for this incredible, incredible gift of being a Jew. Being a Jew is to have a gift. The more we know about it, the more we understand the gift. It's a gift that keeps on giving. Freedom is the vehicle. Freedom is the vehicle to not be enslaved to other gods and be able to commit yourself to truth, which is God, which is our God. So that's how freedom and belief and worship come together. I wish everybody a Chag Kosher V'Sameach, an amazing, amazing holiday. Download at projectinspired.com/Passover, this Passover guide, and also the cartoon about that funny cartoon about the Reform and Conservative, we're all in one. And again, wishing you a wonderful Passover, and everybody should have a tremendous experience, and be the best Passover of our lives. Thanks so much.